To help us understand what's happening, I am so pleased to be joined by one of the world's top experts on employment and technology, and that is not an exaggeration. MIT professor and co-author of the brilliant book, The Second Machine Age, Erik Brynjolfsson. Erik, there's so much to explore in this, but I just wanted to start with that pretty specific point about full employment. The numbers came out recently. Very low unemployment rate, 4.3%. There was this talk of full employment. At the same time as we hear that there's full employment, we hear about communities in crisis, people not being able to find a job. How does that make sense? What's behind that discrepancy?
Well, you're right. Unemployment is pretty low right now, 4.3%. And many other indicators of the economy are doing great. GDP's at record high. We have more millionaires and billionaires than ever in history. But there's a lot of people who aren't benefiting or sharing in that growth. If you look at some other stats, like labor force participation, the share of people who are working, that's near a 30-year low, down around 62%. In fact, it fell even as unemployment was going up. Median income is stagnating. More than half the people in the country aren't seeing their incomes grow. So right now, it's actually lower than it was in the late 1990s. So it seems like a puzzle. We're having more growth than ever before, but a lot of people are not participating. They're being left behind, and that's because it's becoming more and more unequal.
So what's your diagnosis? I mean, in this debate that I think not having enough of, but in the debate to the extent that we're having it, some people blame globalization, others blame technology and automation. I mean, you're literally one of the world's experts. What's your diagnosis of what's going on? And
well, this is, I think,
what the future might hold.
I'm glad you brought this up. And this is, I think, the biggest challenge for our society and our economy today and really over the next decade is how we're going to deal with these wrenching changes that are happening. And most of them are being driven by technology. Globalization certainly plays a part, but in the long run, it's not even close. The big shifts are being caused by some real changes in the technology. Not just robots, but more broadly, digitization of the economy. And that's automating a lot of routine information processing work, a lot of the work that people with high school educations used to do. And more, things like truck driving, I think, are going to be in the bullseye going forward. That's going to dislocate a lot of people. We need to create enough new jobs so that those people can have new things to do. And I don't think we're doing it effectively right now.
So has that happened before? I mean, when we've had these waves of technological change, has it been the case that, I mean, I'm thinking back to, a century or more ago when lots of people were working in agriculture, literally in the fields, and that's
right.
Changed. Big changes have happened in the past. Have we managed to adjust well before, and are there any lessons from that for what we should do this time around?
Well, there are some similarities, and one of the reasons that Andy McAfee and I called the book The Second Machine Age was to harken back to the first industrial revolution, started over in England, where upwards of 90% of people in America, Britain, elsewhere were working in farms, and now, of course, it's less than about 2%. So all those people didn't just become unemployed, we redeployed them. In America, we invented the concept of mass public education to give people the skills so they could work in other areas. That time, that spanned over a couple of centuries. Now we're looking at a couple of decades, so it's a much more rapid transition. There are a lot more jobs being affected because it's affecting all sorts of information processing work, not just manual labor. So it's a much broader, faster, and deeper transition. But there are some good lessons that if we adapt to it as individuals, as organizations, and in our government, I think we will be able to make this transition, and it could be, and it should be, good news for almost everybody.
Well, I've got some thoughts which I'll share at the end of the show on some of the specifics that we can do to help bring that about. I just wanted to see if our panel has any thoughts or questions for Erik. Jake, do you want to go first?
Erik, I wonder, Washington is notoriously slow to adapt to almost any change in the economy and basically anything. I wonder if you could give us some specifics about what Washington could do to facilitate some of these changes in our economy and in our workforce.
Well, it starts with recognizing the issue and the opportunity and problem. I mean, as I mentioned, we're creating enormous amounts of wealth. I mean, there's more wealth in our country than ever before in history. So that's the good news, and means we have more capabilities. But we have to understand that there's some big fundamental changes going on. And I think the big picture is to think about how we can embrace the future. We can't hold back this change. We wouldn't want to hold back this change. And this attitude of trying to freeze in place some of the old jobs or some of the old ways of doing things, I think is a really destructive mindset. A more appropriate mindset would be to how do we reskill people for the new kinds of jobs? How do we encourage entrepreneurship so new products, services, and industries get invented? How do we change our tax policy to adapt to this new society? But ultimately, it's going to be disruptive, it's going to be wrenching, and simply freezing in place the existing system is never going to work.
Kimberly, it sounded like you agreed with a lot of that.
Yeah, I really do. And then I've also seen a lot of the research in Silicon Valley, billionaires talking about offsetting some of this, progression of automation with robots and AI, which I agree, we need that to come as well. You can't stop it because it's coming. But what about this guaranteed universal income and adopting sort of an idea of socialism? Because for me, I feel that that really dampens the capitalist free market spirit to encourage entrepreneurs like the Steve Jobs of the future from coming forward.
Right. It's not really just a socialist idea. I mean, Milton Friedman was one of the people who advocated it. I'm personally not a big fan of it right now because I see that there's so much work that can only be done by people. And so it's a little premature to be saying, let's kick back and have robots do all the work and we can just have our guaranteed income. Maybe someday, maybe in 50 years, I'm not sure when. Right now, there's so much work to be done in healthcare, in education, in cleaning the environment, and in helping people that only humans can do, that robots can't do. So I'm much more of a fan of something that Paul Ryan and Barack Obama agreed on, which was the Earned Income Tax Credit. I'm hoping that we'll see that in the new tax reform, a broadening of the Earned Income Tax Credit. That is, I think is a policy that encourages people to work. It tops off their incomes with additional support, and that way you're able to get dampen some of the effects of income inequality that's been growing quite a bit, but still encourage people to stay in the workforce. And it implicitly also encourages employers to hire more people.
Yeah,
Erik, thank you so much. Lucy, I'm sorry, we don't have time for your thoughts on this, but I just want to thank Erik for joining us. What a great perspective, and I hope we can have you back another time. There's so much to talk about in this whole area. It's just so central to everything that matters.
Always a pleasure. I'm glad you're addressing it.